Close your eyes. Let your breath slow until it matches the slow roll of a far, patient sea. Salt hangs in the air like a memory that refuses to fade. Between you and the horizon, there is only a dim line, a soft seam where water and sky stitch themselves together each night. In that seam, a story waits. It is not loud. It does not demand. It drifts in on a tide of rumor and longing, arrives with the hush of foam on shore. Mu, a name as light as a ripple, as heavy as a continent. Shh, breathe. The ocean remembers. You have heard pieces, a drowned motherland somewhere out in the vast Pacific, a cradle of ancient wisdom that fell beneath the waves and left the world with only whispers. Some tell it like a confession of loss. Others speak of it as a hidden key, a vanished first chapter that would explain everything if only it were found. Standing here, bare feet cooled by wet sand, you can feel why such a story survives. The horizon is a blank page. The ocean writes slowly. It invites you to lean closer and listen for a sentence buried in the surf. Begin with something simple. Why do people long for a lost home? Your mind prefers a single origin, a clear source, a spring where all rivers begin. The world, however, is messy. Peoples wander, languages braid, cultures borrow, trade, forget, remember. Complexity can feel like a stubborn knot at the end of the day. A lost continent promises a smooth ribbon instead, a clean, elegant explanation that slides through the fingers. In that promise is comfort. Even when the tale grows extravagant, the comfort remains. Shh, breathe. The ocean remembers. If you look closely, you will see how easily romance grows around a name. Mu sounds like a sigh, like a cowled monk speaking from the back of a candlelit church, like a pebble dropped into still water and vanishing in concentric rings. A gentle syllable makes space for your imagination. Perhaps there were terraced cities of white stone, courtyards varnished by ocean light, palm leaves whispering above quiet pools. Perhaps scholars traced star paths in pavilions where warm winds wandered. It is easy to build, tile by shining tile, a world worth missing. It is easy to make it kind. Now let the light change. Romance is not the same as truth, and yet truth need not be harsh. The sea can be honest without raising its voice. The unvarnished view starts with what the earth records. Plates that drift over mantles of slow fire, crust that rucks and bends, islands that rise like candle drips and erode into airy lace. What the earth does not record is as telling as what it does. A single, immense, unified civilization should leave signatures that are wide, layered, loud in the language of rocks, soils, shards, carvings, genes. The patient archives under our feet and below the waves do not show such a choir. Hold that thought with a light grip. No need to argue, not tonight. Facts can rest like smooth stones in the palm. You can examine them without bracing. You can set them down without fear. What remains when the grand claim loosens is not an empty bowl. It is a small, sufficient meal, an appreciation of how myths travel, how stories braid themselves into maps, how a quiet wish for belonging can sail farther than any canoe. A myth is rarely useless. It feeds something. Even if it does not feed what it announces, it feeds a hunger just as real. The old story thrives because it is generous to the listener. It says, you are connected to something vast. It says, there was a time when knowledge was not scattered, and you belong to that memory. Look at the way night arrives, gradually, kindly. The sea darkens to a deep indigo. The sky softens to the color of a worn quilt. Your pulse eases into the rhythm of wave, pause, wave. In that rhythm, you can understand the kindness of a lost continent tale. It is a lullaby, a hand on your shoulder saying, once we were together. Shh, breathe. The ocean remembers. But there is another kindness available. It is quieter and perhaps more enduring. It lives in the willingness to say, "I do not know," and in the humility to love the world anyway. If Mu, as a total drowned motherland, is not supported by the strata of the seafloor and the chronology of human cultures, the tenderness at the core of the story still matters. It is the tenderness of seeking a home that is large enough to hold many histories at once, of recognizing kinship without forcing it into a single family portrait. The unvarnished path is not a scolding. It is a candle shaded by a hand, steady in a breeze. Walk a little. Night thickens, but the air remains warm. Sand squeaks under your heels, then turns damp where it remembers the last wave's reach. Far out, unseen swells tilt their shoulders and start toward shore. In that motion is the quiet education of the sea. Nothing vanishes entirely. Everything becomes something else, rearranged, translated, patient. This is why so many cultures keep a flood story tucked among their songs and parables. Water is the most modest teacher. It does not lecture. It merely returns again and again to the same lesson. All shores are temporary. All names are only as solid as the people who speak them. Think about the word origin. It is an invitation, but also a temptation. If you could find a single birthplace of civilization, a single fossil of wisdom from which all thought evolved, the noise would drop away. Silence would announce understanding. Yet the record you can trust suggests many hearths lit at different hours. Fires coaxed up on islands and capes and high valleys, each with its own warmth, each with its own ash and scent, each with its own memory for those who sat close. The comfort, then, is not in collapsing those fires into one bonfire, but in recognizing a darker truth that is still gentle. Warmth is plural. Now release your shoulders. Let them settle. In the dark, distant fishing boats blink. Somewhere behind you, a moth ticks against lamp glass, a soft syllable of persistence. Allow yourself to entertain the possibility that Mu can be something better than a disputed atlas entry. It can be a name for the feeling of missing something you never truly had. It can be a vessel for all the longings that do not fit into precise categories. Longing for a simpler beginning, for a wisdom older than conflict, for proof that the world is secretly organized around care. The ocean will not punish you for that longing. It has heard worse. It has carried every grief from shore to shore and diluted none of them, only given them room to breathe. But the ocean also delights in accuracy. It does not want your sleep to be built on a brittle claim. There is no need to balance on the sharp edge of either or. You are allowed to hold the gentle myth in one hand and the careful data in the other. At night, they are not enemies. They are a tide and a moon. Related, distinct, each making sense of the other's pull. Stand at the meeting line and consider the psychics of story. Not psychics as in fortunes, but the internal physics that decides why some narratives glide and others grind. A single, elegant claim accelerates easily. All roads lead back to one city that sank. It feels like gravity, gathering everything into a center. Complexity has friction. It asks for patience and small adjustments. Asks you to notice the way currents split and rejoin, the way one island's coral grows while another erodes. A bedtime mind prefers low friction. That is natural. So the task here is to lower friction without lowering truth. One way is to make the real feel beautiful. You can speak of plates as slow dancers under velvet, of ridges that rise like sleeping spines, of trenches that are not wounds, but folds where the planet tucks itself in. You can describe culture as a reef, built in increments by many small lives, white in its skeleton, teeming when warm water moves through. You can let language be kind to the measured world. Then the truth will not jar you awake. It will slide into your thoughts the way cool water slides around your ankles when a wave collapses at your feet. You may wonder, where did the name come from, truly? Names have their own currents. They pass from a page to a conversation, from a lecture to a magazine, from a letter to a rumor spiraling outward. Sometimes a name gathers silt and moss as it travels, until it feels older than it is. The details of how it traveled are daytime work. For now, at night, it is enough to notice the feeling a name creates in your chest. If the feeling is one of widening space, of breath moving more easily, then the name has done its gentlest job. A low cloud slides over the moon. The path of light on the swells breaks apart, then stitches itself back together. You do not need to know exactly where the cloud began to appreciate the texture it gives the sky. In the same way, you do not need to verify every vintage of the Moo story to feel the quiet lesson it offers. That humans want to belong to something larger, but also want that something to feel human-sized, accessible, intimate. A continent is an enormous thing to miss. Perhaps the real want is smaller. A street you can walk at dusk, a kitchen hearth that always smells like clean rain. Listen to the little chorus of night. It is not silent. It is generous with small sounds that ask nothing of you. The ocean's edge quilts itself with threads of foam and pulls them apart again, patient as a grandmother undoing and reworking a hem. If the old stories were garments, some would be ceremonial robes, heavy, embroidered, fitted for rare occasions. Others would be blankets, faded at the corners, often mended, always ready. Moo may be more blanket than robe. Not precise enough for official ceremonies, warm enough to keep near when evening cools your skin. There is a gentle discipline in letting stories be blankets. You do not wear them to prove anything. You do not demand that they hold their shape at a banquet or survive the formal gaze of an examiner. You take them up when you need to rest, and you fold them neatly when morning comes. In that discipline, there is respect both for comfort and for clarity. You might feel a release in that balance, the release of knowing you are not betraying truth by finding reassurance in a myth, as long as you call it by its right name. The unvarnished path invites one more thought. The wonder that remains after the smoothing away of grand claims can be even more tender. To imagine the Pacific night without a sunken empire is not to imagine it empty. It is to notice the precise smell of iodine and wet rope, the private chatter of small shore creatures, the far pulse of waves born from storms you will never see. It is to let wonder shrink to scale so it can fit on the tongue, so it can be tasted without overwhelming. Wonder does not need spectacle, it needs attention. Now, the so what that ties a floating story to your anchored life. Every day asks you to choose between simple explanations that soothe and complex realities that demand patience. This is not a binary, it is a rhythm. At night, you can practice the rhythm gently. You can let an alluring name like Moo float through your thoughts like sea glass and still keep a small compass at hand. You can allow comfort to do its work and let accuracy hold the lantern. If you do this softly, you may find that you fall asleep more easily, not because you have decided what is true with a gavel, but because you have allowed truth and longing to share a room. Shh. Breathe. The ocean remembers. It remembers not a single fallen capital, but a million small coastlines and the people who have watched them. It remembers bare feet and lanterns and lullabies in languages that never met. It remembers hands cupped to ears and the tilt of heads that is the same wherever there are waves. It remembers the way the mind, drowsy, reaches backward for origins and forward for meaning and finds, in between, a kind of peace that is neither answer nor surrender. If you listen long enough, you may hear the memory that matters most, not of a vanished land, but of your own capacity to be kind to what you do not know. Kindness is the true motherland. It makes room for possibilities without pressing them into a shape they cannot hold. It lets a legend rest as legend and a map rest as map. It allows you to be held by the steady, tidal presence of what is, even as you dream of what might be. The sea is large enough for both. Let the shore cool, let the tide turn. The night has settled fully now, and the sky is near black velvet stitched with faint, careful stars. Your breathing lives there too, as another quiet light. You do not need to reach any conclusion before sleep. You do not need to take anything with you except the knowledge that stories can be gentle and truthful at once, if you let them be exactly what they are. A name on your tongue. A page the ocean is still writing. A horizon that says softly, not yet, not everything, but enough for tonight. Shh. Breathe. The ocean remembers. Imagine, for the sake of rest, that you wake to a room made of light. Not bright light, nothing harsh. It moves like warm water over the walls, shallow and clear, as if dawn itself were a gentle tide, lapping against lime-washed stone. The ceiling above you carries a faint pattern, a net of shadows thrown by a woven mat and a row of palm ribs hung to dry. Somewhere outside, not far, a gull loosens a single call and then thinks better of it. The air is cool along the floor and warmer where it drifts past your face. Before thought arrives, you are a body listening. You breathe. The ocean remembers. The bed is a low platform, its frame a quiet geometry of wood smoothed by years of hands. A thin cloth has slipped from your shoulder during the night. You lift it back into place and feel the small grit of salt on the fabric's edge. It is the kind of salt that seems to organize itself out of nowhere, a lace that gathers wherever air has a habit of moving. When you angle your feet to the floor, the surface gives a soft, welcome sigh, the hush of woven reed beneath the weight of the first step. Nothing creaks, nothing resists. It is a room without corners to the ear. You wash from a basin, the kind of bowl whose lip has been pressed by many palms. The water is neither cold nor warm, only fresh, a word that in this place includes a mineral sweetness, a hint of leaf, a memory of clay. You pause to watch ripples write small circles against the copper. There is a patient logic to the place. Containers are simple and purposeful. A low shelf keeps 3 cups turned mouth downward. A folded cloth rests atop another, regularly shaped but not machine straight. It knows the hands that shaped it. As you lean over the bowl, the world outside offers another line in its soft poem, an oar touching water, once. When you step out, you meet the day at half height, somewhere between the city's first whisper and its first sentence. The lane collects coolness the way cupped hands collect water. Shade is an object that moves along the wall, slow as a cat. Even the smells are unhurried. A strand of toasted grain drifting from a courtyard, the quietest echo of smoke from last night's brazier, the green, clean edge of crushed leaf under someone's heel. A potter yawns in a doorway, tilts a jug, and spills 1 palm of water over his fingers, as if simply to remind them of their task. You nod. Your body returns the greeting in the easiest language 2 bodies share, a small smile that does not rise to the eyes, because the eyes are still waking. If you turn left, you follow the lane toward a seam of breeze that hints at an opening. A corner yields to a long, narrow terrace, and then there the city rests. Terraced roofs and pavilion tops stepping down toward the plain. Every level a pause where people place chairs or jars or simply their elbows to watch weather happen at a distance. The sea is not yet vivid. It is a strip of metal burnished by cloud. You take the stairs molded by bare feet and years of gentle rain, each tread slightly concave, each edge proof that time can be soft and still be strong. On the second terrace, a small market has assembled itself without fuss. There is no shouting. People arrange things and each other the way you arrange cushions, for comfort, for the slow pleasure of knowing exactly where to reach without looking. A woman smooths the skin of a squash with her thumb. A boy counts coils of string by tapping them lightly, as if they might bruise. Fish lie with both dignity and indifference on beds of damp frond. Their eyes have not learned to be entirely here or entirely gone. Baskets line themselves in a shade that is more pattern than shadow. You walk among these things as if you are a stitch passing through cloth that has been stitched before. You buy a roll of bread thin as a folded leaf and a wedge of something that tastes like the pastures just before noon, cured, mild, patient. The seller wraps them in a clean scrap and tucks one corner in as if the paper were a small sail. "For the breeze," she says. Or perhaps she says nothing, and the breeze says it for her. There is a place to sit not far, a low wall that knows exactly how to hold a back. 2 children pass carrying a shallow bowl between them. When they turn, the sun catches something in the bottom, perhaps water, perhaps oil, so that a bright oval walks ahead of them along the stone. From here, the city's skin looks consistent, like a single material joined without seam. The same pale plaster, the same timber, the same stillness. But when you stand again and move, you find it is all small differences. A lintel whittled at the ends to make the shadow above a door look like a line of script. A pebble set into stucco at the height of a child's gaze, no larger than a nail head, placed there to be touched and counted and worried smooth by play. A ledge left unplastered, so a cat can spring to it, making an easy path along the wall for night patrols. In a place with few loud events, attention becomes its own art. A turn to the right carries you toward the workshops. Here the sounds are still gentle but more frequent. A flute made of reed offers 3 notes and then thinks of a 4th. A shuttle taps its frame in a loom and then hesitates, considering its path through the warp. A metal tool touches stone and makes a syllable so thin you have to lean your head to feel it with your ear. You pause in the doorway of a potter's shade. The man at the wheel is not young, not old. His hands are what you will remember. They enter and leave the clay with a confidence that does not advertise itself. Between one breath and the next, the pot finds its waist, then its shoulder, then the thin lip that will meet a drinker's mouth, not with a kiss, but with a courtesy bow. "Do you want to try?" he asks, except he does not need to ask. You know before your hands are wet that they want this. The wheel is foot-driven and unconcerned with speed. The clay does not rush to be anything. You center it, or rather you fail at centering it, and he covers your hands with his to help the wobble quiet itself. There is a moment, unfamiliar and immediately faithful, when the clay agrees to be your companion. It rises. It listens. It is something like learning the breath of someone sleeping beside you for the first time, the shared rhythm that was always there but is now named. When you lift your foot and the wheel slows, the pot's soft walls hold their shape the way a memory holds its temperature. At the weavers, the colors are not bright. They breathe like the sea in shade. Gray-blue, sand, pearl, the brown of dry vine bark. A cloth grows under the shuttle, not a picture, but a pattern of patience, a tiny argument resolved again and again until it becomes a song. On a low bench, someone ties knots in a fringe, each knot a small decision. The room smells faintly of fiber after rain, though there is no rain, only the memory of it in the vegetable dyes, the memory of it in the rinsed skeins drying on a rope. The floor is strewn with threads that have already done their work. Past the workshops, the street widens enough to let sunlight sit on its knees. A pair of young trees ride a square of earth layered into the paving. They flicker with leaf, as if the breeze were asking them friendly questions. A woman with a basket stops to adjust the cloth under the fruit to make it more comfortable on her arm. You can see the moment she recognizes that comfort as worthy of the extra 10 seconds. An old man rests 3 fingers on the rough wall beside him to measure his balance while he turns to greet a friend. Every gesture looks like a loan paid back to the body with interest. You follow the seam of air that knows the sea. It is easy to find. In any city near water, there is a boulevard invisible on maps, a corridor made of scent and temperature that pulls you by the nose and the skin to the shore. Here, the ground gives up its stone and becomes packed sand. The houses loosen, the spaces between them widen, and the sound changes its weight. There is almost no surf, only a long, slow lift and set, as if the water were a chest rising under a blanket. A few boats lean against the curve of the beach. An oar has been left with its blade resting on a low rock, as carefully as you might lay a spoon across a bowl. You sit where the dunes first think about being dunes. The grass there is a set of careful strokes, not quite green, not quite gold. In the shallow water, the bottom keeps its promises, ridges of sand that say, "Here is the shape we will make when the wind is from the north. Here is the shape for other days." A child walks the ridgelines like a tightrope, hands out, accepting the small wobbles as the price of pleasure. At your left, someone gathers tiny shells in a dish, the kind of shells that seem designed to become buttons. Their softness the same as skin around the eyelids. No one is loud. No one is in a hurry. The beach belongs to the part of day that never learned to measure itself. Closer to the jetty, a few people dip jars into baskets of seaweed, lifting strands and letting them fall through fingers in the game every hand plays at the shore, enjoying the slickness while pretending not to. An older woman sits on a low stool with a small knife and a pile of wet rope. She works knots open, easing them back to honesty. The knife is less tool than punctuation. It appears only when a sentence refuses to recognize itself, when a tangle has forgotten how it was made. She could teach time a few things about gentleness and insistence living in the same palm. Near noon, the light begins to shine not harder but closer, like a friend who has pulled up a chair and set their elbows on your table. You retreat to a narrow path that returns to the terraces by way of 3 turns and a shaded well. The well wears its rope like a shawl. The pulley sings once and then rests. In the cool, someone has placed small cups for strangers. You lift one and feel the shock of clean water make a small star in your mouth. When you lean to set the cup back, you notice that the stone at the well's lip has been worn into twin crescents by centuries of the same motion. The marks look like smiles, and maybe they are. At home or at the house that is yours because you decided it would be for an afternoon, you eat lightly. The bread tastes even better without salt on the air. The wedge of cheese has deepened its calm into something you could sit inside if you had to. You lie down where the mat throws its netted shadow and let your eyes close without ceremony. Sleep arrives not as a wall, but as a curtain you can lift and lower with the same hand. In that sleep there is no drama. It is the kind of rest that repairs nothing dramatic, because nothing dramatic is broken. Shh. Breathe. The ocean remembers. When you wake, the room has inhaled, exhaled, and rearranged its light. Afternoon has the softness of worn linen. You decide to climb. Not far, just enough to see roofs compose and decompose as a pattern. On the higher terrace, the city looks like stacked pages, the kind you can fan with a thumb and watch pictures move. A narrow garden has been tucked between 2 parapets. Beans climb a lattice slowly, as if aware that someone is watching and did not come for speed. There are herbs in little rows, each with a chipped shard at its head to stand for a name. Not writing, just a habit of grace. A pair of elders sits with a board between them. They play a game whose rules you do not know and might not understand even if explained. The point seems to be the pleasure of placing small stones into small spaces and letting the hand know it could have chosen differently. They look up once to share a remark that contains both weather and a memory more than 40 years old. You can tell this by the way their mouths shape the silence afterwards, making room for a third participant who is not there and is entirely present. Time cohabits here without friction. You step into a pavilion open on 3 sides. Its columns are the color of sand at the edge of shade. On the ceiling, someone has painted a simple map of the local sky, the kind of chart that answers only the questions most people actually ask. Where is the path the moon prefers? And where do we point our bodies when we want to mark the longest day? And where will the stars gather to pour themselves like flour into a bowl from that notch in the hill? You lie on your back on a low bench and let the painted constellations explain nothing at all except that they are faithful. They appear where they appeared last year. They will appear again. Outside, a drum speaks once and then goes quiet, the way a teacher might touch a desk with a fingertip to call for attention and then have nothing urgent to say. Children drift toward the sound and then away again. No one corrals them because nothing needs corralling. A young man demonstrates a step for a friend, a dance step perhaps, or a method for carrying weight without tiring the shoulder. The friend tries, laughs, tries again, succeeds, forgets, repeats. The repetition is the point. It is how the step moves from one body to another without bothering with paper. You take a clay cup of something steeped, leaves or bark or a flower whose perfume you cannot find, until the cup is close enough to warm your upper lip. The taste is a curve, bitter at the front edge, sweet at the back, a quiet mineral in the middle that calms you the way the thought of rain calms dry land. You drink without thinking of anything much. That is the taste's design. The cup's lip has been shaped for this specific work, the thickness reduced until contact is a conversation in which your mouth does most of the talking, and the cup only nods. By now, the city's breath has shortened to match the sun's descent. People tidy small spaces with movements that are not chores so much as gestures of thanks. A broom makes the simplest music. A door is lifted from its pegs and leaned inside where night will not swell it. Someone shakes a cloth just long enough to tell the day, "We have seen you, and we return you to yourself now." Smoke learns its path up through the hole left for it. A bowl is rinsed in 2 waters, one for use, one for kindness. You feel a wish to participate in this grammar of completion, and you do. You fold the cloth you used earlier and put it where the hand that needs it tomorrow will find it without searching. The shore is close again. You go not to bathe, not to seek anything, only to witness the light's last thrift. Dusk here is like a good listener. It doesn't interrupt. The sea takes the sun on its surface and makes of it a long, thin gift that reaches land and lies down with its head in the sand. A few people stand with their hands at their sides, the way one stands beside a friend who is crying when the crying is not a crisis, merely a weather that must be waited out. A gull draws a line across the sky and erases it at once. Everything agrees to be quiet. A man lays a small instrument in his lap, a stringed thing, uncomplicated. He plucks it just enough to show it is alive, not enough to ask for attention. The notes hang in air that has grown cooler. They do not demand to be remembered. They are content to be heard and then permitted to continue onward to wherever notes go when they are finished with being sound. A second person hums along, not exactly in tune, exactly in character. The music is a circle drawn with a fingertip in dust. It will be walked through. That is fine. At the edge of the crowd there is a simple act, nearly private, not a ceremony but adjacent to one. Someone lifts a bowl and tips its contents into the shallows. You cannot see what was in the bowl. It could have been fruit or petals or clean water. It may have been nothing at all. merely a gesture tracing the outline of gratitude on the skin of the world. The person who does it does not look around to see whether anyone noticed. The sea notices. The bowl goes home empty and more useful. Little by little, lamps wake in their niches. Their flames look as if they are answering a question that is kind and does not require proof. The light is sufficient for faces and for hands. It does not try to be a second sun. The city reduces itself to the parts of itself that must be visible in order for people to be kind to one another in the dark. Steps, thresholds, the immediate shape of a doorway, the turn of a wrist holding a cup, the curve of a cheek as it turns to listen. Everything else becomes an agreement made in trust. You walk with your hands open because open hands find rails more gently. When you return to your room, the mat's pattern has moved again and become a new geography. You sit where the shadow suggests and let night begin its work. There is a basin to pour from, a cloth to fold back, a window to check with a touch. You repeat what you did in the morning, only slower, as if you are explaining the routine to a child without using words. The small sounds your actions make, cloth, water, wood, settle on the room's surfaces like birds finding roosts. You lie down and feel every part of you agree to be where it is. Shh. Breathe. The ocean remembers. Before sleep, there is a thought that arrives the way a moth arrives at a lamp. Uncertain, then certain, then quiet. This day could have been anywhere. The slowness, the attention, the hands repeating their arts until the arts entered them like breath. None of that requires a vanished continent. It is a mercy to admit that. The mercy does not cancel the beauty of imagining. It makes room for it. You can keep the city of warm stone and gentle games folded in your mind like the spare blanket at the foot of a bed. You can take it out when the wind changes. You do not have to argue about the blanket's genealogy to enjoy its warmth. The last thing you hear is the water's long sentence, each clause washing the shore's punctuation away and writing it again. It says, here, and then it says, again. And then it says nothing you can translate. The nothing is the important part. It leaves just enough space for you to fall into, not like a stone, not like a leaf, but like the thought that finally does not require a thinker. Your breathing finds the same cadence the sea prefers when it is most itself, long, easy, unconcerned with being measured. The city sleeps without ceremony, because ceremony would be a kind of noise. If in the morning someone were to ask what you saw, you might say, I saw ordinary things arranged with care. I saw hands that understood their tools and tools that were grateful to be understood. I saw light behave itself and shade step in where light tired. I saw water hold a bowl and a bowl hold water, and neither pretend to be anything else. You could say those words and let them be as simple as they sound. Or you could say nothing and let the day be what it was. A slow breath taken by a place that may never have existed exactly as you pictured it and did not need to, because the picture did its job. It let your mind rest. You sleep now. The room lifts and settles with your chest. The sea carries a long memory past your window without asking you to keep up. Your mouth softens at the corners. Your hands forget what work is and remember what belonging feels like. The city, if it exists anywhere, exists in the common space between wanting and accepting. It is enough to have walked through that space once, quietly, without leaving tracks. Shh. Breathe. The ocean remembers. Let night stay where it is, close and kind. Let the shore keep its soft edge. You do not need bright light to see the shape of a thought. You only need a steady flame cupped by a hand. Tonight, the flame is a simple question, the sort you can hold without burning yourself. If a place like Mu had truly existed as a vast, unified motherland, what traces would the patient earth keep, and how would we read them without raising our voices? Shh, Breathe. The ocean remembers. Begin with calm words. Evidence is not a drum. It does not demand attention. It prefers rhythm, repetition, patience. It is a way of noticing that has agreed to be the same tomorrow as it is today, and the same for you as for anyone else who looks. Think of a tide gauge fixed to a pier. It marks heights regularly. It does not hurry for storms or slouch for calms. Method is the pier. Measures are the marks. You will not be asked to memorize rules. You will be asked for gentleness, which is harder and kinder. Watch twice, then a third time. Set one finding next to another like smooth stones on a low wall. See whether they keep each other company. The earth keeps a diary, not on paper, but in layers. Rock lies over rock the way years lie over years in a quiet house, each with its own dust and its own light. When something immense happens, the diary makes room for it. A mountain range folds into being, and the layers crumple like cloth placed back on a chair. A volcano pours glass and ash, and the page is dark for a while. An ocean opens, and the floor that forms is young. A new page, still smelling of ink. If a continent-sized civilization had risen and spread its weight across a wide Pacific stage, you would expect its presence to echo in many kinds of pages at once. In stones, in soils, in the paths of tools, in the patterns of genes, in the grammar of things people leave behind without meaning to. Trash piles, broken bowls, the pollen of plants grown in numbers too big to hide. Let your mind sit beside the slow geologist at the edge of the sea. She does not hurry. With one finger, she traces the lace of coastlines and the long backs of underwater ridges you cannot see from shore. The planet's outer shell is not a single sheet. It is a mosaic on warm, moving water. The pieces drift. They meet and say hello. They press and frown. They slide past one another like polite neighbors. This is not a story of sudden cataclysm swallowing a world in a single night. It is a lullaby of inches, of centuries, that stack into mountains and then lean back down into plains. Where ocean floor is born, it is young. Where it is pushed and folded, it keeps the creases. A vanished super realm the size of the romantic tale would leave seams too grand to miss. The diary does not record them. This is not a scolding, only a loosening of a knot. You can feel the knot soften as if soaked. It is possible to let go of one vision, the elegant, complete, drowned motherland, and still keep wonder like a dry, warm towel close to hand. Because the ocean does keep worlds. Islands rise from hot spots and stitch chains out of cooled fire. Platforms of shallow sea build reefs that are cities for fish and memory for people. Segments of thicker crust wander, thin, drown, erode. Something is always changing shape. The question is not whether change happens, it does, but whether the kind of change a single-night doom ballad needs is the kind that ever visits a planet with this particular patience. Set geology down with care and pick up another lens, no heavier, the quiet grammar of artifacts. People do not live without touching the world into new shapes. Even those who prefer simplicity leave fingerprints in clay and wood and stone. A large, long-lived, and interconnected culture would tend to generate a fabric of things that travel, styles that repeat and then evolve, tool systems that march with families and trade, ornaments that echo from harbor to harbor. Think of how a favorite weave moves from valley to valley, changing just enough in each place to recognize its journey. Think of how cup rims align, how arrow points repeat, how a certain kind of paint under a certain kind of hand feels like a dialect. Across the Pacific Rim and the islands within it, there are many fabrics, many weaves, many local sensibilities. That plurality is itself beautiful. What is not present is the broad, single hand of a vanished capital instructing all the others. The shelves of time show no such uniformity spread wide and then broken in a single cat stroke. Do not mistake quiet for emptiness. Archaeology knows how to hear small things. A shell midden the height of your knee can speak of centuries. The charcoal under a hearthstone can date a memory precisely enough to let a story rest. Pollen, those tiny stars, float through mud and end up as calendars. If you were to read the Pacific carefully, you would find journeys both enormous and subtle. People directing canoes across astonishing distances by feeling the rise and fall of swells through the hull in darkness. Languages that sprout like plants from a shared ancestor, then branch and flower into local songs. Gardens built from genius, feeding communities on rocks that look barren to untrained eyes. This chorus does not need a single conductor to be magnificent. Its magnificence lies in the many. There is a temptation to turn many into one because one is an easier lullaby. Resist gently. Let many be your calm. Notice how sleep prefers plurality. Many waves, many breaths, many similar stars, not one star shouting. When you think of human origins and human cleverness, allow yourself the soft truth that excellence is democratic across time. Fires were lit in different places. Boats were carved by unrelated hands that understood wood in the same intimate way. Calendars were learned from different skies. This does not make the world friendless. It makes it rich and hospitable, capable of providing more than one cradle at once. Another lens, this one soft as cloth. Language. Words evolve with the steady stubbornness of tide. They carry proteins of meaning. They mutate. They split and return and echo. Linguists listen for the patterns under the patterns. They follow sounds the way a tracker follows prints. If a single parent civilization had ruled the islands and coasts of half an ocean, its speech would likely have sown a family of tongues with resemblances strong enough to be cousins you could recognize even at a distance. What listeners hear instead is a garden of families, related within regions, wonderfully connected island to island, but without the signatures of one imperial school that taught everyone to say the same first words. The beauty here is not loss, it is local light. You can set language next to genes without making either embarrassed. Gene patterns are not destiny, they are simply footprints. They tell you that people moved and mixed, that voyages were made, that someone stood facing a particular wind with a particular child in her arms. The prints across the great water tell of dispersals and gatherings, of cousins, of long flights by canoe and long stays on beaches with friendly soil. They do not tell of a single collapsed empire flinging its citizens outward like stars from a burst. Again, this is not a correction, only a lullaby played in a key that does not wake the house. Now hold your breath for a count and let it out slowly. The myth, in its elegant form, insists on suddenness. One proud platform, then a plunge. One capital, then a silence. The records you can touch prefer long verbs. Drift, lift, settle, braid, erode, learn. The mismatch can feel sharp if you grip it too tight. Loosen your hand. Some nights you want a story to end with a door slammed by weather. Tonight is not one of those nights. Tonight you want doors that are eased shut with 2 fingers and a smile for the hinges. Shh. Breathe. The ocean remembers. There is, in the soft field between geology and archaeology and language and lineage, a habit that keeps the mind from stumbling. Ask what else would have to be true. If Mu sank, what else follows? Not in menace, but in care. Where are the long, drowned roads detectable under modern silt across hundreds of miles at matched latitudes? Where are the shattered cities whose stone would have tumbled but still announced themselves by stubborn right angles? By heaps of worked blocks in places the currents do not clean? Where are the sudden breaks in pottery styles across dozens of far shores at the same horizon of time, as if all had been fed by one kitchen that stopped? The lists remain largely blank. The diary's pages turn without such entries. This space between a legend you can love and a record that asks for other loves does not need to be a battlefield. It can be a courtyard at dusk. In one corner, a lantern burns over maps that show the age of crust like tree rings, dark for young, pale for older, with the mid-ocean ridges like stitched seams. In another, a basket of sherds sits beside a brush and basin, each fragment a syllable from a long, humble poem. Somewhere a teacher murmurs to a child about how to hear the difference between a distant canoe and a distant wind shift, not with the ears, but with the soles of the feet. In this courtyard, the legend is a guest with good manners. It does not raise its voice over the hosts. What then do you do with the longing that makes the legend glow? You do not throw it out. You let it change jobs. Instead of serving as a claim about the floor of the ocean, it becomes a mirror you hold to your own face at night. It shows you the parts of you that want origin to be simple and home to be single, and grief to have one cause that can be named and forgiven. It shows you the parts of you that will sleep better if you are brave enough to share comfort with accuracy. Comfort says, there was a cradle. Accuracy says, there were many. The cradle that fits you best is made of more than one wood. Listen to the small ethics that arrive when big claims rest. There is kindness in admitting that real island histories are not spare parts of a fallen empire's machine. They are their own engines, built with skill that was born right where it was used. There is respect in letting navigators keep their stars, farmers their terraces, carvers their gods, languages their local music. You do not enrich those stories by offering them a parent they did not ask for. You enrich them by staying, by listening, by learning the way a reef learns, slowly, quietly, through many little lives, stacked and shining. Turn your head slightly and look at the sea again, not as a stage for a single actor, but as a schoolyard where many games happen side by side. See the wave trains crossing, the faint interference patterns where they meet, the crescents and chevrons they pencil into sand at low tide. In those patterns, the mind that wanted Mu can find a new, gentler company, multiplicity without chaos. The coast does not need one author to look composed. Composition is what water does automatically when space is generous. There will always be stories that claim to have found the missing cornerstone. They are comforting because cornerstones are heavy. Once placed, they promise not to move. The diary of the earth and the cupboards of old kitchens suggest a different architecture for comfort. Not a single stone at the corner, but many small stones well set, each doing its part, none pretending to carry the whole house. If you are very quiet, you can feel your breathing imitate that arrangement. Not one enormous breath that solves the night, but many small ones that keep faith with the next. You might worry that letting go of the grand collapse takes away drama and leaves you with a map too calm to hold the heart. But the heart does not need thunder to beat. It needs rhythm. The true rhythm of the Pacific, of any sea, of any people settled along its edges, is slow, repeating, intricate. Voyages outward and back, plantings and harvests, stories told with the same first sentence and many different endings, tools sharpened and handed down, songs altered at the edge of a note to please the shape of a new tongue. 1,000 small pulses make a life steadier than one strike. As the night leans further in, there is a soft, so what, the kind that lies down beside you rather than standing over you. What matters is not adjudicating a courtroom drama of legend versus ledger. What matters is letting both teach you how to sleep responsibly. You are allowed to dream of cities of warm stone that never hurried anyone, and of roofs that guided wind like polite hands, as long as your waking self remembers where such places live. in the space of humane imagination, not in the pages of a geology text. You are allowed to smile at the word moo, and keep on smiling when you whisper to yourself that the ocean floor tells a slower, different tale. Shh. Breathe. The ocean remembers. It remembers not a single command spoken from a vanished throne, but 1,000 small commands given by hands to wood and water. Push, pull, lift, tie, release. It remembers those instructions because they were repeated kindly for generations. If there is an empire worth sleeping beside, it is made of repetitions that never needed a palace, cooking, mending, steering by the shape of swell, planting by the feel of soil warmed under sandals. These are not less grand. They are grand enough. Lay the lenses down, one by one, rock, shard, word, blood. They lie quietly on the table like tools rinsed after work. In the morning, if you want, you can pick them up and look again. Tonight, it is enough to know that they agree more often than not, and when they disagree, they do so civilly. Tonight, it is enough to let the legend be a blanket, and the method be the chair that holds your weight while you pull the blanket up. No court, no verdict, only a room with the window cracked enough for salt to make a lace on the sill. The tide continues its patient accounting at the edge of the world. Each wave writes, here. Each retreat writes, again. Between here and again is the interval where sleep lives. This is the place where your mind learns to love patterns that are true and tenderness that is not embarrassed by truth. You do not have to trade one for the other. You can let them take turns the way people at a well take turns, each lowering the rope with a smile that belongs equally to those who came before and those who will come after. Let your breath follow the example. In with the soft fact that the earth keeps orderly records. Out with the soft permission to keep the kindest parts of a legend without insisting they be stone. In with the quiet knowledge that plurality is not noise. Out with the acceptance that a myth's best home is the heart that knows what it is. The flame in the hand does not flicker. The room does not need more light. Shh, breathe. The ocean remembers. Let the room stay dim. Let the waves keep their soft handwriting at the edge of the dark. You do not have to brace for anything. Tonight, the question arrives without teeth. Why do stories about worlds vanishing in a single night feel so right in the mouth, and what happens to them if you hold them in a calm hand long enough to see their threads? Shh. Breathe. The ocean remembers. Suddenness is kind to a tired mind. It closes doors for you. One moment the house is lit, the next the lamps go out, and there is nothing left to arrange. A clean ending spares you the work of 1,000 small adjustments. In a world where most changes take the slow shape of seasons, the fable of a swift collapse is a mercy, a single note that says, "It happened, and now it is done." At bedtime, that single note can be as soothing as a heartbeat under a blanket. A continent that sank all at once is a continent you do not need to visit again. The story finishes itself while you sleep. But the planet prefers verbs that take their time. Drift lift, settle erode. Fold flood too, but flood as chorus rather than solo. Tides rising over centuries. River mouths laying down deltas grain by patient grain. Coasts loosening and trailing their garments along the lines where water wants them. The difference between the fable and the floor beneath the fable is not an argument. It is a change in tempo. The fable moves like lightning, writing trees out of existence in the space between two blinks. The floor moves like moss, building a miniature forest on the back of a single stone. Both are beautiful. One simply lets you sleep more deeply because it asks less of your adrenaline. People learn the sea's moods long before they could name a tectonic plate. They feel the way a wave train thickens under a certain wind, or how a swell with a long stride announces weather born far away. They build their homes just above the measure their grandparents taught them. Here was the high water before the big year. Here is where we plant, here is where we do not. And still, sometimes, the world insists on being immediate. A wall of water, a shaking ground, a slope that decides to travel to the valley all at once. These do happen. They happen rarely, and where they happen, they carve their tracks into history deeper than any plow. One generation lives inside the event, the next learns to describe it, and the third learns to fit it to a parable. Over time, an afternoon becomes a night, a village becomes a realm, a shoreline cut by one storm becomes a continent swallowed. This is not deception. It is the garment memory sews for itself when it wants to be wearable by children. The older ones speak in details, whose boat broke its tether and whose did not, which hill grew a new scar, which oven they could not save. The younger ones need a pattern they can pass in a single breath. So the pattern grows large and clean. Everything we knew, then a wave. Everything we were, then the dark. In that pattern is a useful warning. Do not forget that the sea can stand up if it wishes, and also a tenderness. The pain becomes a shape you can hold without dropping it. If you lean into the hush of night and listen, you can hear the quieter collapses that carry most of the world's weight. A terrace wall gives way after a decade of rain and a season too many of goats. A canal loses its patience with silt. A spring draws back in a dry year and never fully returns. Families go elsewhere, not in fear, but in arithmetic. The city does not drown, it loosens. One house, then a street, then a neighborhood admits that the center has shifted. When people come back years later, they stand where a doorway used to be and lace their fingers through air. We were here, they say, and the plants agree by growing out of the places where the stairs once turned. A myth made from such leaving would not sell as many maps, but it would tell the truth about how most endings arrive. On foot, not by horse. You can hold both kinds of loss without letting them quarrel. The rare strike that names an entire year and settles into a calendar with a black ribbon. The ordinary erosion that eats the corners first and leaves the center to sigh itself into the earth. Between them, the mind braids a story that can be told under many roofs. In one version, a proud capital drops beneath the waves. In another, the water never rises above anyone's knees, but seed after seed fails to find a resting place, and that is enough. The first makes a mighty sound, the second hums. Humming is what you hear when people go about saving what can be saved. You can also feel the pull of fairness hidden inside catastrophe tales. They promise a symmetry the hour rarely provides. A great people lost in a great way, as if the method of going must match the size of what went. This, too, is a kindness meant for minds that ache. But the record of stone and silt and habit is less theatrical. Greatness and smallness do not always select their partners with care. A modest mistake, one tree cut on the wrong slope, one wall not checked in time, one channel let to choke, can start a sequence large enough to make a map redraw itself. The planet is not a judge. It is a patient machinist, and every cog touches every other whether or not the hand that set them meant them to. When stories lean toward suddenness, they also lean toward cause. A continent sinks because someone angered the sky. A city vanishes because a law was broken. The moral weight balances the physical loss. This makes the event narratable in a circle. Wrongdoing, warning, strike, lesson, quiet. The circle comforts. The sea, however, does not need your morality to decide its weight on shore. It keeps tides because the moon asks it to, and because the earth itself leans and turns, and because water moves when it is touched. The lesson available to a calm listener is simpler and less theatrical. Do not build where the sea insists it will one day stand, and if you must build there because there is nowhere else, then build as if you were ready to leave when asked. When darkness is kind, you can visit the shelves where the mind keeps the shapes it uses to make sense of what it cannot control. On one shelf, the map is kingdom. All the parts must belong to a single order, and when that order fails, the parts sink with their sovereign. On another shelf, the quilt as world, patches stitched from many histories, each with its own seams. If a piece wears thin, the others keep the warmth, while a new patch is cut. Catastrophe myths love the first shelf because kings sink well. The sea loves the second because quilts breathe. You can choose the quilt without disrespecting the grief that invented the crown. The grief wanted simplicity. The quilt offers sleep. You are allowed to fold into this quiet another, more private truth. Collapsed stories also cradle personal endings. They give names to hours when something in you went under too quickly for language to follow. The news that took the floor from your house. The call that turned your hands to wood. The look that told you a season had closed and there would be no reopening ceremony. To say, a city sank in one night, is sometimes to say, I woke different and could not say how. Myths are hospitable. They will hold this for you while you practice walking on the new land. If you place an ear to the ground of a coast that has known many people, you will hear how memory and caution braid themselves into custom without the need to pronounce the word catastrophe. A shrine that requests you never fish the nursery waters during a certain moon. A rule about the season when no tree with two nests may fall. A story that says the tide is a small god and does not like doors that face a certain way. These are not superstitions in the mouths that speak them. They are performances of respect that experience has taught, and if the moral story wrapped around them feels grand, the daily life that keeps them is quiet, practical, kind. In such places, the myth of a single ruin softens. What remains is a practice of staying. The ocean is large enough to host myths without being bound by them. It will accept your flowers and your ash and your songs and your small boats full of candles and your wide-eyed children searching the foam for fragments of lost palaces. It will carry each offering as carefully as if it were a gull's egg set in the palm of a storm. And tomorrow, it will still come and go. It will remember the gesture, because it remembers everything, and it will also continue to be itself. Pulling on shorelines, dragging sandbars along like low clouds, lengthening and shortening beaches as if measuring them for dresses whose hems must always be let out or taken in. Once you feel that steadiness under your feet, the glamour of the single night fall begins to change its flavor. It does not become bitter. It becomes quiet. You can still tell the tale, because tales are part of the way people warm their rooms. You can still walk along the beach and look for columns under the water and shells that look like coins and stones that look like tools. But the looking is a game now, not a courtroom. You do not have to prove that the world owes you a monument to your longing. The monuments that exist, reef edges, dune lines, pebbled bars that move like patient animals from season to season, are subtle, moving, alive with rearrangement. They will keep you company if you learn their tempo. Think of the small techniques that make living with a coast graceful. A wall built not to stop the sea but to whisper with it. A field shaped to pour away what it cannot drink and to hold what it can. A boat that understands the swell and does not fight the angle the swell prefers. A fisher's hand that reads the skin of the morning for news. None of these belongs in a thunderous myth. All of them belong in a lullaby. This is because lullabies care less about explaining the cause of storms and more about teaching the body to float on the sleep that will follow them. If you need a picture to carry to bed, carry this. A long table in a courtyard a little above the harbor. evening passing its hand over bowls to count them. Around the table sit people whose grandparents taught them where to put their houses and how to think about a horizon. On the wall behind them hangs a map painted by a patient, inaccurate brush. The islands are cousins here, not measurements. In the center of the table, a lamp burns low. The talk is not of ruins beneath the water. It is of roofs that held, and paths that learned to drain, and a new line cut above the old high water mark, because this generation can see what last generation could not. Catastrophe is not banished. It is domesticated. It wears a chair at the end of the table and says very little. When myths about sudden drownings travel far from the shores that raised them, they sometimes lose this domestication and grow glossy. They return with costumes and proclamations. The costumes are handsome, the proclamations are exciting. But distance is a poor tutor of nuance, and the careful balance between warning and consolation becomes a simple appetite for wonder. There is no harm in wonder, so long as you remember to put it back in its place at night. Wonder is a guest. The host is the person who must decide where to build and how to clean the doorway after a storm has thrown sticks against it. Hosts sleep better when guests remember their manners. If you were to hold the most durable collapse story you know up to a soft light, you would see the stitches. Fear stitched to awe, awe stitched to instruction, instruction stitched to belonging. No single hand ever sewed the whole thing. Many hands hemmed and patchworked as years insisted on adding their own rooms to the house of memory. The result is not a law, it is a garment. You can wear it when the wind rises and you need something to pull tight around your shoulders. You can fold it and lay it on the chair when the morning is clear and you want both hands free. The ocean has its own garment, of course. Tide. It dresses and undresses the shore twice daily and never seems embarrassed to be seen in the same outfit again and again. If you learn to love repetition, catastrophe becomes less an idol and more a distant relative who visits rarely and is offered tea. Your sleep does not need to be guarded by a wall built against a single night. It can be guarded by the ordinary acts that keep most nights from ever needing a wall. Acts so small they do not even have names in tongues that forgot how to praise small things because they were busy memorizing the names of kings. Shh. Breathe. The ocean remembers. It remembers a few loud hours, yes, and it remembers every quiet one. It remembers boats lifted onto roofs and boats set back into sand with laughter 2 days later. It remembers lines cut into stone by cautious hands to say, "Not this far." It remembers stories that began as cries and aged into songs. It remembers that people will always ask for a single cause and a single lesson, and that the world will answer with a list too long to recite in one sitting, and that this is not cruelty, but abundance. You can lie down inside abundance without getting lost. Let the larger myth fold itself smaller and smaller until it fits in your pocket like a smooth pebble. Let the slower truths take the bed. They are not glamorous. Plant with the contour. Keep an eye on the low spot. Mend the net before it tears at sea. Listen for the difference between a friendly breeze and a visiting storm. They will sing to you without melody until your breath has forgotten what rushing feels like. Catastrophes will come when they will, and they will be absorbed into the quilt. The quilt will be mended. The hands that mend it will teach other hands. Before sleep, you can honor both the blazing tail and the patient floor by telling yourself a sentence that holds them without forcing them to share a coat. Say, "Some nights the world ends for someone in 1 hour, and we keep those hours in a silver box." Say, "Most days the world changes by whispers, and we keep those whispers in bread, in brooms, in careful maps made by calloused fingers." If you can carry both sentences to the pillow, you will dream a dream large enough for waves and small enough for the ring left by a cup set on a table in evening light. Shh. Breathe. The ocean remembers. Ocean. Keep the lights low. Let paper be a sound, soft, dry, turning. Imagine the warm hum of a lamp and the slight, companionable weight of a book on your knees. The sea is far outside, but the room you sit in carries its hush. The question for tonight is a gentle one. If the Earth's slow diary does not write a single fallen motherland into the pages beneath the Pacific, how did the name of such a place grow so large in the minds of people who had never stood together on any one shore? Shh. Breathe. The ocean remembers. Begin with a room where stories learn to dress themselves. A parlor in the late evening, cups stacked, chairs close, voices low. The century is busy inventing machines to move bodies and information faster than a horse can imagine. Steam pushes vessels against the wind. Telegraph taps send thin lightning along wires that straddle rivers. Presses bite ink into paper until newspapers multiply like gulls on a wind line. In a corner, a globe sleeps on its axle. Someone touches it with one finger and sets it spinning, and the continents perform for the room. It is easy to place a fingertip on the vast blue and say a name into it, to let the name blur as the water moves. The legend does not burst into the world. It condenses. First a hint in a travelogue, a rumor folded into a discussion of a reef or a chain of islands. Then a fuller flourish in a lecture where slides show ruins, some real, some misread, some sketched by hands that wanted to see what the mouth was already saying. Then an article in a magazine that likes mysteries and prints them with a confident serif. Each retelling sands away details that do not fit in the pocket. Each retelling polishes the word until it shines with the light of its own repetition. The room becomes many rooms. The parlor becomes a club, a hall, a radio studio, a page with a photograph of a page. Printing itself is a kind of tide. It leaves small deposits in countless places. A clipping folded into a letter, a paragraph underlined and shared across a table, a cheap reprint rolled and slid into a pocket. When a phrase can be carried that way, it earns new lives. A lost motherland. 4 words light enough to travel by hand, sticky enough to hold their shape when they arrive. Distance adds glamour. Far away is a perfume. The mind that is tired after a day's work inhales and sees a terrace city that never had to bargain for lumber or argue with weather that changed its mind. Another room. Not private now, but smoky, public, red velvet on the seats. A lecturer with a pointer. Slides arranged in a carousel. The audience wishing for a joint revelation, the way people in a theater wish to gasp all at once. The pointer taps a map. The coastlines are careful. The blue is so blue you can feel coolness by looking. The voice sketching the case draws power from confidence rather than from careful footnotes. Confidence is a lullaby in rooms like this. It lets 100 people lean back at the same angle and imagine that knowing has arrived like rain that covers every roof equally. The legend learns to borrow clothes from authority. It uses words the laboratory likes, and numbers that look tidy on a page. It claims inscriptions where there are patterns, scripts where there are carvings worn down by long blowing sand. It points to families of words and forgets to ask whether the cousins actually recognize each other at family meals. It says proof in a tone normally reserved for weather, because weather does not apologize for arriving. The more the language resembles the language of measurement, the more a reader's shoulders drop. So much of life refuses to be simple that a simple claim feels like a gift. Gifts are unwrapped quickly. Ribbons are kept. Boxes go into drawers where other boxes once went. The legend also learns to sit beside other, older guests that the 19th and 20th centuries invited into parlors. Tales draped in mystic silk. Salvage ethnographies wrapped in a tourist's camera strap. Dreams of an language that would gather all tongues into one throat and sing a chorus whose parts never went flat. Rooms like these wanted to believe in unity because the clock outside had begun to tick in factories, and the countryside had learned the hard grammar of schedules. A single motherland was a counterstroke against a world that specialized itself into fine dust. It said, "Long ago, before the dividing and file drawing, we were one." Distance did its part. When the center of a story is elsewhere, the details develop a gentle immunity to correction. Elsewhere can rarely walk into the room and say, "No, our doorways are not that shape. No, our words are not your words. No, your map smudges our grandmother's garden." Elsewhere cannot interrupt the show to offer its own slides. In this protection, the legend gains a free hand. It is a hand that does not always intend harm. Often it means to praise. But praise that has not listened can turn a face into a mask. It can lay the gold leaf of a guess over the exact wood grain of a real history and call the result ancient. The legend changes with the speed of the wires that carry it. First, pages that cross water by ship and arrive with the smell of rope and custom seals and the hands of men who stack cargo in the rain. Then, pages carried by rail, rattling through stations that sound like clocks swallowing their own ticks. Then, voices that cross air to sit in a box in a kitchen while someone washes cups. Then, pictures that move. Then, words that reappear with the push of a key. The faster a story travels, the more its own speed becomes an argument. "See how quickly I am everywhere," it says. "I must be true. I could not keep being repeated if I were not." Repetition leans on a friend. Collage. A photograph of a stepped pyramid from one place is printed beside a photograph of a terraced field from another. The captions talk to each other as if they were neighbors. A carving on a lintel beside a carving on a fan blade. A pose in a painting next to a posture in a statue. The eye, hungry for symmetry, completes bridges where there are only two shores politely facing one another with water in between. The bridges are rhetoric. They are not stone. It is easy to forget this when the page is handsome and the captions are certain. There is also the sweet authority of maps. A map turns the world into something that will lie flat and hold still. It makes an offer to the eye. Trace this line and you will know. A blank space begs to be named. A long blue expanse invites someone to say, "Here," and write a word. When a map maker tints a region and gives it a neat label in italics, the tint feels like paint drying on reality. Later, when someone moves the label a few inches or erases it politely in a new edition, the earlier paint lingers in the mind. The eye does not forget where the boats of imagination once anchored. Meanwhile, the century is a pair of hands. One hand builds a machine that can fold and collate 1,000 pamphlets in an afternoon. The other hand takes a specimen pin and presses through a name that was never made to be flattened. The pen is a habit of mind that dissects first and asks later whether the living thing wanted to be a display. In this atmosphere, a legend about a single mother people's cradle under the sea can be a comfort not only because it praises unity, but because it offers an origin that belongs to everyone. Everyone in these rooms often means we who are speaking. Elsewhere learns to watch its own names acquire new meanings and then be given back with an apology that remains unspoken. Inside the legend's modern wardrobe is a trick it learned from theater. If you cannot prove the palace, prove the furniture. Show a column fragment underwater. Call it a capital. Show a wall where a wall could have been natural. Call it a terrace. When asked to assemble a full hallway, smile gently and dim the lights. The dimming is not sinister, it is persuasive. Low light makes an audience share a mood. Sharing a mood is a form of faith. Faith trims questions to a manageable size, especially on a night when the room is warm and the outside air hisses softly in the rain. There are quieter forces, too, that encourage the legend to gain weight. After years when nations tore at one another and left maps needing new edges, people reach for narratives that heal by stepping away from the particular. A universal cradle, a mother tongue, a city under the sea whose lesson is not who won or who lost, but that humans are small and oceans are patient. Even those who would not swear to the palace enjoy the moral. Be humble, be gentle, remember water. The legend becomes a bowl that serves many soups. A single word floats at the rim. It is lifted again and again by different hands. Not all rooms were asleep to the difficulties. There were voices that asked for footnotes that matched their sources. There were patient writers who said, "If we love the ocean, we must love the slowness of rock and the plurality of islands." But even caution can be hymnal if sung by enough throats. A careful person writes a line noting that the evidence is suggestive and means it is not there. A reader, wanting a song more than a ledger, hears, "nearly there." The difference is not deception. It is the soft hazard of hope. Hope loves a maybe, especially when maybe is shorter than the list of reasons to wait. As the century turns again and again, images learn to swim. Ink becomes pixels. A sentence grows fins. The distance between a claim and an audience shortens until it is the distance between the wrist and the eye. In this new water, old claims move like schools, sudden, collective, shining in the same direction. The music that guides them is not a flute but an algorithm, and its ear is tuned to rhythm more than to source. Words that repeat are taught to repeat again because they are repeating. A loop is built and decorated with pretty shells, a diagram, a cropped photograph, a quotation lifted from a book that never said it. Night after night, screens carry these loops to bedsides, and the old parlor returns in a smaller mirror. In these small mirrors, a kindness is still available. You can watch the legend's modern journey and choose to see the hunger that moved it rather than the vanity that dressed it. The hunger is not mean. It wants a larger family. It wants to belong to an origin story that softens borders and translates strangers into cousins. The problem is not the yearning. It is the shortcut. Real kinship is not found by drawing a single circle around everyone and calling that circle home. It is found by learning the specific names of shores and the words for wind that only one island uses, and then holding those specifics with the reverence due to elders. Legends are tempted to flatten elders into silhouettes. The modern magic that multiplies a beautiful silhouette can forget the depth of the person who cast it. There is another sweetness still. The legend created communities out of thin air. Reading clubs, late-night letter writers, people who clipped and mailed and argued with courtesy about the position of an imagined capital on a map. Families placed a paper globe in a child's room and showed a small finger the spread of blue. "Some say there was a land there," they murmured. The child, who already loved hiding places and secret doors, carried the idea to bed as a bookmark. Many scholars, careful ones, first learned to love maps and layers and patient questions from such small bedtime gifts. The path from a legend to a life in truth is not scandalous. It is common and kind. The legend also taught a practical lesson by accident, how easily certainty is woven from repeated cloth. When a statement appears in 10 books, it begins to feel like a stone you can step on. When one of those books is handsome and presses its pages with weight, the feeling deepens. The modern age is a lesson in this textile trick. Threads repeat, patterns emerge. The fabric looks old. Age looks like authority. The only cure is not suspicion, but slowness. The slowness of checking a thread's beginning and seeing whether it vanishes into air or into a loom. Many people who were first charmed by a lost motherland later learned this slowness and carried it into other rooms where it did considerable good. If you turn the lamp low and look at the century's archives sidewise, you can see how softly power moves through a well-told tale. Pages written far from the shore begin to define the shore for those who have never stood there. Photo captions decide what a carving means in a language the caption writer does not speak. A diagram places an arrow and says, "Influence," and the arrow begins to live as surely as if carved in stone. None of this is wicked at the level of individual intention. It is simply what breath does when many mouths exhale the same wish. The wish is for a line that connects all points and does so in a single stroke. A gentler vision waits behind the wish. It looks like a bench outside a library with salt dust on its steps. Two people sit and share a small pile of books. They open one and find a claim about a city under the sea. They open another and find a method for sounding depths that writes in numbers and not in myth. They open a third and find a song recorded on an island doorway 100 years ago, sung for a moon that owns no continents, about canoes and ancestors, and the shape a swell makes when it carries news from far off. The three books do not quarrel. They ask for ordering. Story in the lap, method under the arm, song in the chest. If the order is kept, none has to pretend not to know the others. Sometimes the legend learns humility in public. A magazine prints a breathless piece about stones under the water. A diver returns and reports that the stones are natural shelves, beautiful in their own right, reproducing themselves down the shore with a patience that has nothing to do with palaces. The correction is not as exciting as the claim. It travels less far, but it does not vanish. It remains for the mapmaker who reads both pieces and learns to label not only with names but with adjectives. Stepped, eroded, raised, young. Adjectives prevent crowns. They are small, practical hats that fit the heads they are given. At the softest edge of the legend's modern journey is a recognition. What people wanted was not to steal a history, but to borrow a sense of scale. An underwater city would have told them that their troubles were small compared to time and tide. It would have offered the sweetness of insignificance, the relief of being one stitch in a garment so large you could never see its hem. There are gentler ways to get this sweetness. Stand near a shore and watch a long swell lift and set for 15 minutes. Look at a fossil in a museum and let your breath slow until the rock seems to be breathing with you. Speak the names of a few stars in a whisper and hear how they sound like grandparents. Small practices, no crowns. Let the room be quieter now. The lamp's circle of light does not reach the far shelves. It does not need to. You can close the book and keep its warmth on your knees for a moment before you set it aside. The legend you have watched learning to travel is not a villain. It is a boat built by many hands who wanted to cross a difficult span of night. The boat leaks in places. It does not sink. It merely reminds those who board it that shore is better for sleeping than water, and that the best boats are the ones that bring you back to ground with a kiss instead of a crash. Shh. Breathe. The ocean remembers. It remembers pages pressed under a paperweight shaped like a shell. It remembers a glass case with a faded map and the place where a thumb once wore a shine into the blue. It remembers a child tracing a finger through the Pacific and resting by chance on a point where a real island raises its head to the sun. It remembers the hum of radios, the silver whisper of film spooling, the secretive glow of screens in bedrooms where people curl around their questions. It remembers that every age has its magic, and that the newest magic is only the oldest one taught to walk faster. If there is a lesson that sleeps well, it is this: legends are good company when they admit they are guests. The modern world invited a legend to sit at many tables. Sometimes the legend remembered its manners. Sometimes it forgot. The night forgives both without forgetting the difference. In that forgiveness, there is room to love the story for the comfort it brought, and to love the measured world for the trust it keeps. You can let both stand near your bed like guardian figures who do not quarrel because they do not need to share a coat. One is a blanket folded neatly, kept for cool evenings. The other is the chair that takes your weight while you lift the blanket, Shh. Breathe. The ocean remembers. Keep the room dim. Let the air sit on your skin like a light shawl. Outside, the ocean continues its patient handwriting on the edge of the world. Inside, a smaller tide comes and goes in your chest. Tonight is not for dazzling lights or declarations. Tonight is for looking the way lanternfish look, softly, with a glow that troubles nothing. The question is simple and large. When we listen to the sea with the instruments that prefer patience, when we map and measure and return again, what does the bottom write back? And how can those letters ease you toward sleep? Shh. Breathe. The ocean remembers. Begin with a single sound, one that might be too small to hear unless your ear leans against the hull of a quiet ship in a quiet night. Ping. Not a shout. A syllable. The sound leaves a device shaped like a careful thought and travels downward until it touches the floor, then returns, thinner now, like a question that has decided it is an answer after all. Another ping follows the first, and another, and soon a line of measures becomes a ribbon, and the ribbon becomes a curtain, and the curtain, laid side by side with other curtains from other nights, becomes a map, a soft quilt of distances and times that say not mystery solved, but terrain, understood enough to draw with calm hands. Mapping is not conquest. It is cradle-making for knowledge. Ships do this work in slow braids. One track to the west, another a little east, back and forth, the way a gardener waters a bed with an even hand. The sea does not mind. It likes regularity. The crew learns the sea's moods by the weight of mugs on a table. A quiet map grows under the keel. Far overhead, another instrument, an eye that sees weight rather than color, watches the surface bend by the pull of mass it cannot see, and from that bend infers hills and trenches below. Two different listens, one from above, one from within, hum to each other until their notes agree. Agreement is a lullaby all its own. Sometimes a camera goes down in a frame with gentle lights. The lights are not theater. They are courtesy lamps for stones and silt. The camera drifts above a bottom that is not flat but not dramatic either, an undulation like an old blanket smoothed by patient hands. Small creatures move through their errands, untroubled by this evening visitor. The camera is not a searcher for palaces. It is a visitor to a neighborhood where nothing has ever asked to be royal. It comes home carrying images the way shells carry the sea even after they have left it. Quiet, slightly salted, not more than they are. What then do these listens and looks agree upon? That the seafloor is not a drowned chessboard of plinths and plazas. It is a living page, and on that page, the planet's slow hand writes in a few favorite scripts. One script is the seam, a long, sinuous stitch where new floor is born and pushed outward on both sides. Picture a zipper of basalt whispered into being by heat. Picture the seam pulling itself open a fraction of a finger width in a human lifetime. On either side, the newborn rock darkens and cools and accumulates a fur of fine sediment, the way a black sweater gathers the smallest dust. The seam is not a scar. It is a cradle that never stops being a cradle. Another script is the fold. Far from the seam, where floors meet edges, one plate bows and slides beneath another, and the bow carves a trench graceful as a calligrapher's flourish. Along the outer rim of that curve, stones shake their shoulders and lift a chain of peaks that lean toward the sky. In the trench, darkness is not a menace. It is simply what happens when distance from light becomes a kind of dignity. The fold is not violence. It is an agreement about space between neighbors who have learned to share a table that moves. Between seam and fold is an expanse wide as sleep, the abyssal plains where silt stitches itself into a coverlet. These plains are not empty. They are simply uninterested in drama. They record time with a dust-fine pen. A grain falls from the remains of a tiny creature whose name does not matter tonight. It drifts, turns, lands. A million cousins follow for 1,000 years. The coverlet thickens by millimeters, modest and precise. If you were to hold a slice of that coverlet and read it with a magnifying lamp, you would find not a palace's fall, but seasons, currents, blooms, quiet deaths. History written as a lullaby rather than a trumpet. There are also hills, endless, orderly hills no taller than a few houses, repeating like breath. They are called abyssal hills, but names are unimportant. What matters is that they show how even newborn crust, pushed outward from the seam, keeps a memory of the moment it cooled and cracked. If you could run your palm along these hills, the sensation would be like touching the inside of a hand, lines, whirls, a certainty that this is not manufactured, not placed here to impress you, simply grown to suit its purpose. Seamounts rise from this plain as if a musician had set stakes at irregular intervals to mark a rhythm only the earth hears. Some have flat tops, old mesas sheared by waves in another age, and then let to sink with their cooling bodies. Some are sharp, their peaks still crisp with youth. They are hosts rather than mysteries. They gather travelers. They make small weather in their lee. They are not fragments of a buried stair. They are rooms of the ocean's large house, furnished by currents. Currents are the memory of the sea expressed as motion. They are not roads, though sometimes they faithfully return you to the same cove year after year. They are the sea thinking with its whole body, warmth up, salt down, wind here, rotation there, until a pattern emerges you can trace with a finger on a map if you are very gentle. A gyre turns like a slow breath in a sleeping chest. An upwelling lifts a sheet of cold, nourished water to greet sunlight with a shy abundance. A narrow band changes its mind with the season, edging a little poleward now, a little equatorward then, and the fish learn it as well as you might learn the sigh of a door in your grandmother's house. Drop a drifting float, a small, honest messenger, into the surface, and it will write a letter in its path. The letter may be looping and untidy, or it may be a long, low arc with the patience of pilgrimages. Drop a profiling float, and it will ride the water column itself, rising and sinking with the ease of a dream, reporting in simple numbers that are almost poetry when you line them up. This much warmth, this much salt, this depth where the two together decide how the water will behave. Read enough such letters, and the ocean's handwriting can be recognized in the dark. Where currents touch bottom, they comb it. They pull sands into crescents you could nap inside if you were a seal. They line and unline ripples. They sculpt dunes that migrate as slowly as regrets. Now and then, a heavier flow scours a channel, and the channel glints on a map like a remembered path a river took in another life when the sea was lower and the land leaned its shoulder more toward the sky. None of this requires a courtroom to admire. It requires only the patience to look until repetition becomes comfort rather than boredom. Measure other things too, gently. Count the tiny shells that rain from above and find a rhythm. Listen for underwater earthquakes with instruments that nod when the crust clears its throat far away. Take the temperature of the deep and notice that even there, where night is thick as velvet, the numbers shift with a dignity too slow for any clock in your house. All these measures are lullabies when you let them be. They do not ask you to solve anything. They ask you to recognize company. Stones keeping time, waters keeping memory, small lives keeping house on vast floors. What does not appear, no matter how kindly you look, is the geometry of human pride spread across thousands of miles in straight angles and deliberate patterns. The floor shows right angles of its own, fractures where the crust shrugged just so, intersections where nature played with lines. But these are not the ghosted corners of halls filled with voices. They are the echo of cooling rates and stresses, of minerals choosing households, of forces that speak in a grammar only rock fully understands. Expecting avenues here is like expecting a sonnet in the rings of a tree. The rings are poetry, but not in that meter. This absence is not a rebuke, it is a relief. If the floor paraded palaces, your mind would stay awake to count them. Instead, it offers repetitions that say, sleep is safe. The ridge continues, the trench continues, the plain continues. The slopes sort gravel the way you sort thoughts before you fold a day and put it in the drawer. Continuity is an invitation. The sea writes again on every page, and again is the oldest spell against fear. Sometimes the instruments come back not with numbers, but with textures that ask to be touched. A core of mud lifted to the deck in a sleeve, dark, cool, faintly smelling of far rain, splits under a knife into pages. Each page is a year, or decades, or centuries, depending on where it was taken. Even without a microscope, you can see the difference between restless ages and steady ones. Fine light layers where winters were kind, coarser, darker dunks where storms were busy. A thin ash tells of a mountain's brief, astonished fling with air. None of these pages tell you of marble under meters of blue. They tell you of patience paid and patience owed. On other days, the listening happens closer to land, where waves drag and push, and the map must be refreshed because sand is a nomad and refuses to be taxed in one place. Here, too, the bed forms are gentle. They align with the prevailing wind's signature like grass bending in a field. If there is a ruin, it is the kind of ruin time makes with water on anything, not the kind made by a sudden judgment from a fable. A wooden post found far from any modern pier, gnawed into a softness that makes it resemble drift bone. A line of stones that might once have been a human ambition, and now are only stones again. Lower a censer that tastes the sea instead of seeing it. It will tell you that salt is not a single flavor, and that a change in parts per thousand is a word in the sea's vocabulary as clear to it as home is to you. It will tell you that oxygen breathes a verse of the deep as real as any lullaby your grandmother hummed. It will say that warmth curls into the ocean in places where wind and sun agree to let it, and that this warmth, once it joins, does not forget where it came from. It carries a regional accent all the way to the next meeting. Consider the simplest instrument of all, a line with a lead weight and a mind at the other end willing to be patient while the weight drops, and drops, and then kisses the floor and softens the line's tug. Once, that was enough to draw the first drafts of understanding, numbers penciled in salt-stained notebooks, little circles on charts. Even those early circles show no sprawling colonnades. They show the same thing the newer instruments show more richly, a polite, vast, stony patience, a tendency toward pattern without pomp, a preference for longevity over spectacle. If you let your mind drift with a current across the mapped floor, you move over provinces. A ridge where hot breath is translated into rock and then into roughness. A province of small hills regular as the stitches in a well-made sweater. Another of sediment so even that the light would fall asleep if it could. Beyond that, a slope where grains choose sizes the way a choir chooses notes, closer together here, further apart there, until the music suits the angle. This is not a tour of wonders. It is a tour of peace. What does such peace do to legends? It does not kill them, it feeds them differently. A legend that took its power from drama can learn the comforts of fidelity instead. Fidelity is the promise that a map will still be a map in the morning. Fidelity is the promise that the seam will still seam, the fold will still fold, the plane will still plane, even when storms clatter loudly at the surface and boats run home with their lanterns tucked under coats. Fidelity is what lets you sleep next to a window you have left open a finger because you know the world will not enter without knocking. There are places where the floor startles even the calmest mapper. A sudden scarp, a field of broken blocks where the crust sighed and shrugged more than usual, a mound ringed with life that eats chemical light rather than sunlight. Even these are local astonishments, not empire-wide epiphanies. They are the sea clearing its throat, not raising its voice. They are the place in a long book where the author allows a paragraph to widen into a full page because the reader has been attentive and can be trusted with a little excitement before bedtime. After the page, the book resumes its even pace. You can imagine, if you like, a table on a ship where 4 objects rest in a square of lamplight. A chart edged with pencil marks. A small vial of silt that looks unremarkable and is precious because of what it remembers. A length of line with a lead that has known many floors. And a worn mug whose handle fits one hand so well it could have been carved for it. If the legend of a drowned motherland were to sit down at this table, it would find room among these objects, but it would have to speak more quietly than it does in crowded halls. The table enforces a tone, measured, tender, precise. The legend, in such company, would learn to say, perhaps, less. Again, more. Return now to currents, because they are the sea's handwriting where it writes the fastest. They curl around seamounts and leave echoes of themselves on the floors behind. They press along shelves and borrow sand to trace their own profiles. They talk to wind and moon and length of day and the subtle asymmetry of a spinning sphere. In the talk, they carry larvae and leaves and the smell of one coast to another. They are the quiet accusation against 2 simple maps that only draw lines on land. The true map is mostly water, and that map is not flat. It is a suspended song sung in temperature and salt, and the small bravery of plankton that ride and do not complain. You could spend years learning to pronounce this song correctly. You could become the kind of person who knows the feel, through a hull, of a long period swell versus a shorter wind-borne chop, who knows the quiver in a line that means silt rather than gravel, who hears, in a string of numbers coming from a buoy, the beginning of a seasonal turn that will bring fish closer to shore. None of that knowledge requires the bones of vanished avenues. All of it requires humility, the humility that pays attention without insisting on crowns. If you need a single image to hold as sleep comes, hold this. A mid-ocean ridge like a bedtime seam down the spine of the world, flanked by plains tucked in under a blanket of dust-fine shells, visited by mountains that are hosts and not monuments, attended by currents that never stop writing letters to shores. Above, a surface that reflects clouds and hides none of this while concealing all of it. Within, a memory that refuses drama not because drama is bad, but because drama is rare, and the daily is the true keeper of calm. You will not find a perfect circle of pillars there. You will find arcs of fracture, clean slopes, lazy dunes. You will not find a city square. You will find a pause in gradient where life has chosen to gather, because the buffet is balanced. You will not find long roads. You will find long ripples that reset themselves with every storm and call that resetting normal. It is not less beautiful. It is beauty that arrives without trumpets, ready to sit, ready to stay, ready to let you breathe. Shh. Breathe. The ocean remembers. It remembers the pings that have traveled out and back, each a long blink. It remembers the thumbs of cartographers blackened by graphite. It remembers the taste of a lead weight returning to air, the way water threads itself from its surface and falls back, unwilling to be taken away from its home. It remembers the first time a camera saw a field of pillow lava and did not know the name, only the texture, and loved the texture enough to ask someone else later, in daylight, how to call it properly. You can sleep because the sea is doing its work whether you applaud or not. The map will be there in the morning, slightly better for someone's care, slightly more accurate in the corner where the ship turned just so to fill a gap. No news bulletin will splash across the floor of the ocean tonight that overturns everything that kindness and attention have already learned. There will be refinements, the way a seam moved 2 boat lengths from where the last crew thought it lay, the way a cone that was smoothed is a little sharper this season. Refinements are rest. They are the mind remaking a bed that was already made, because making is itself the comfort. Let the dark wrap the instruments, and the instruments keep their own small clockwork. Let the currents carry their letters to the places that know how to read them. Let the ridge write its unending sentence, not exciting enough for posters, perfect for the heart. You are not missing the show. The show is not a single night. It is a continuity. You have entered the way a canoe enters a long swell, by aligning, not by conquering. Shh. Breathe. The ocean remembers. Keep the room as it is. Low light, quiet air, the kind of darkness that feels like a soft hand on your forehead. Outside, the sea continues its old conversation with the shore. 1 sentence forward, 1 sentence back. While inside, your breath keeps a similar pace. There is no verdict waiting here, no gavel to come down. Only a closing question that asks for nothing more than presence. When myth has hung up its costume for the night and method has put away its careful tools, what still holds you, and why does that hold feel like home? Shh. Breathe. The ocean remembers. Home, at this hour, is not a point on a map. It is a way of resting with what you know and with what you do not. Throughout these nights, you have walked through a legend's hushed rooms, set a cup on the patient table of evidence, traced the slow handwriting of ridges and plains, and listened to stories learn how to travel without losing their manners. What remains is not an argument, but a posture. Shoulders released, jaw light, attention unarmed. The mind that wanted a single origin does not leave empty-handed. It leaves with something gentler. A practice of belonging that does not require a throne. Hold the images that were kindest to you and arrange them like pillows. A city that may never have been, moving at the speed of courtesy. A clay cup whose lip knew exactly how much to ask of your mouth. A well with twin crescents worn by ropes lowered and raised by hands that did not hurry and did not fail. A seam down the back of the world where new floor is born in darkness. A plain that accumulates history in grains too small to brag. A terrace step made concave by feet that trusted it. None of these demands belief in a drowned capital. Each asks only to be noticed. Noticing is a kind of prayer that requires neither altar nor oath. The legend did a service whether or not its palace existed. It named a longing, that wide, tidal ache for an earlier kindness, for a gathered beginning, for a circle large enough to bring all cousins under one fleece. When the legend sits down in honesty, it points to that longing and smiles without embarrassment. And then it yields the floor to the measured world, which offers a different kindness. The reassurance that beginnings are many, that hearths burned in more than one valley, that you do not have to choose between plurality and peace. Plurality is a quieter peace, but it lasts the night. There is a way to think about origins that does not raise the voice. Imagine a dark room with many small lamps. Each lamp is its own first fire. None cancels the others. Together they make a constellated warmth that lets people see where to place their hands. The lamps foster songs whose verses do not match line by line, yet harmonize because breath is a language that does not need translation. The comfort here does not come from a single wick becoming a bonfire. It comes from an understanding older than argument. Enough light is enough, and enough light can be many. When you let this arrangement be sufficient, the need for a great collapse to explain a great absence loosens its grip. Worlds change by whispers more often than thunder. People leave in pairs with a goat and a bundle more often than they flee before a screaming wave. Maps redraw themselves along riverbeds and terrace walls and slowly shifting springs. The ocean hosts these changes with a patience that does not broadcast itself. Its memory is not a scroll of proclamations, but a blanket of regularities. The again that tucks you in. Again the tide. Again the wind from that quarter. Again the season when the low shoal shows its back at dawn and disappears by noon. If there is an ethic that sleeps well, it is respect for particularity. The modern journey of the legend taught this by accident. The farther a story travels from the shore that raised it, the lighter its pockets become, until nuance falls out like smooth stones unnoticed. To be fair to the people whose real islands rim the big blue, do not turn their houses into theorized ruins for the sake of your comfort. Let their histories be themselves, potent and local and learned in the language of wind and clay and reed and path. Let navigators keep their stars and farmers their terraces and musicians their patient drums. A legend can be a guest in these houses if it takes off its shoes. Kindness woven through accuracy, accuracy warmed by kindness. That pairing is the blanket you have been sewing in the dark. The thread never needed to be gold. Unshowy thread is stronger. It crosses the seam again and again until the fabric ceases to worry about tearing. You can feel this in the body. Your breath has learned a tide. Your jaw has forgotten to hold on to what it cannot carry. The room does not grow brighter, only truer. The dark keeps your outline without hardening it. Listen to how memory works at this hour. It files without flourish. It arranges the day's phrases into drawers labeled not with dates, but with textures. Clay cool under the palm, bread edged with salt air, rope damping a pulley's brief song, a stringed instrument admitting it can be content with 3 notes. Myth slides into a folder marked comforting names. Method slides into a folder marked trustworthy habits. Between them is a folder marked both, and it holds the moments when a story learned to respect a shoreline and when a measurement learned to speak softly enough to be welcomed indoors. The ocean has taught a grammar throughout, subjects that repeat and verbs that take their time. Ridge seams, trench folds, abyssal plains, seamount hosts, currents that write letters in salt and heat and time. These are not spectacles to keep you awake. They are rhythms that ferry you towards sleep without asking for applause. If you picture them now, picture them small, a fingertip tracing a spine on a globe, a pencil shading a soft band where a gyre turns, a vial of silt held up to a lamp and found beautiful, not for what it claims, but for what it remembers without boasting. There is a quiet dignity in letting unknowns be unknowns without dressing them as secrets. Mystery at bedtime is not a locked door. It is an open window that admits night air shaped like salt. The mind can rest beside such an opening without inventing a procession to explain the breeze. If the floor of the ocean keeps no avenues of quarried stone, it keeps other avenues, more generous to the sleeper. Isotherms that wind patiently, isoholines that arc like calligraphy, sound speed layers that bend a ping the way fog bends a bell. To know that these exist is already a kind of homecoming. You are not outside the world when you do not know a thing. You are inside its hospitality. Consider the little mercies that method promises tomorrow. Refinements, not revolutions. Someone will draw a ridge a little more in line with itself. Someone will notice a trench's floor is not as flat as last year's profile suggested. Someone will take a core and find a thin new ash that dates itself with a flourish that seems modest compared to the mountain that made it. None of this is a trumpet. It is the sound of a quilt being mended where a seam needed love. The mind sleeps better under quilts that have been mended by careful hands because careful hands imply a morning. On the shore of a different room, the legend finds its most becoming stance. It stands without costume and speaks with a small voice that makes room for others to speak after. I named something you were going to name anyway, it admits, the desire to belong to a story bigger than the sum of your errands. In that admission is a freedom. The legend does not need to persuade the ocean. The ocean is already persuaded of itself. The legend needs only to help you remember that you are a guest whose presence can be tender. There is a sentence, simple and heavy enough to use as an anchor, that has surfaced before and can surface again without exhausting you. Kindness is the true motherland. It is not a flag. It is a practice. It is how your hands behave toward cups and ropes and reeds and faces that look at you across evening. It is how you regard the parts of the world you cannot certify. It is the way you decline to turn a living coast into a museum diorama for the sake of a sharper tale. It is the patient refusal to flatten someone else's memory into a prop for your wonder. Speak the sentence once under your breath and let it drift where sentences go when they sink and become a ground others can stand on. It is easy to love the dramatic. It is harder and better for sleep to love the faithful. Fidelity is the opposite of fever. The ridge does not forget to be a ridge. The tide does not forget its calendar. The star path across the pavilion ceiling, painted in a simple hand for ordinary use, does not wander because someone arrived who wanted spectacle. Fidelity turns the lock on a room where rest is possible. You can lie down there without having to keep one foot on the floor against dizziness. The room knows the trick of staying in one place while the world moves slowly around it. If you want to hold one day from these nights, hold the day that refused performance. The market with its quiet breads. The workshop where clay learned the name of your fingers. The shore where a bowl gave itself to water without needing a witness. Settled attention, humble repetition, gestures finished to their corners. These are the architecture of a life that does not require an empire to feel ample. They are not consolation prizes after the palace has been set aside. They are the prize itself. There is also a grief tucked into the hem of these stories, honest and soft. Some part of you wanted to find the great stair underwater because some part of you once had to leave a room too quickly. Catastrophe tales cradle that memory, give it a surname and an address. When you let them be blankets rather than laws, they keep you warm without binding your arms. You can turn in your sleep. The world does not freeze in one posture to accommodate your fear. It breathes, and in that breathing, it teaches you again what you already know at the edges of consciousness. Endings arrive on foot, and so do continuations. Look again, very gently, at the map that will wait for you after sleep. It is mostly water, and even the land prefers to talk about itself as if it were a guest at the water's table. The map is not a set of claims, it is a set of invitations to go slow. Slow across pages, slow across currents, slow across conversations with elders who learned to hear the difference between a friendly breeze and a visiting storm. Slow across shelves where books and bowls share dust. The legend is a bookmark in that atlas, and the method is the lamp beside it. Neither will mind if you fall asleep with the book open. The ocean will mark the place. Shh, breathe. The ocean remembers. It remembers parlor rooms where names learned to travel and ship tables where pencils smudged graphite into weathered charts. It remembers a child's finger pausing in the blue, a diver's light finding a natural step and loving it for the right reason, a scholar's margin note that replaced proof with perhaps, and felt the word turn kind in the hand. It remembers you, on a night before this one, standing at a window and listening to the water say, "here" and "again," as if those two words were sufficient to hold a life. They often are. As the coast darkens, specificities gather like small lamps in the mind. The smell of iodine on wind, the sound of a pulley that has decided to be quiet after one honest note, the weight of a lead returning home to the deck with a thread of water unwilling to leave it. The hush of a mat's moving shadow as the moon considers your room. The way a cup's lip teaches the mouth to be modest. These things will not argue for you in the morning. They will do something better. They will ask nothing, and in asking nothing, give you back a portion of yourself that never needed to win. If there is a final work to be done, it is not hard, and it is not long. Let the legend take its true size. Let the measured world keep its chair. Let the two stand beside your bed like an old couple who have learned, across decades, to be companionably silent. One knows how to tell children a story that will help them close their eyes. The other knows how to calculate the tide so that boats can come home. Both are in love with the same coast. Neither is jealous of the other. Their shared devotion is the room's temperature. Consider, for a breath, the nights of others. Somewhere, at this moment, someone mends a net with a rhythm that would put a child to sleep. Someone compares the shape of today's surf to a story told by a grandparent. Someone writes a number from a buoy and nods because the number is the number it should be. Someone sets a bowl on the sill to cool and forgets it there and finds it in the morning with a new skin and a familiar scent. The world is full of repetitions that do not bore because they are the scaffolding of mercy. Mercy is not a flash, it is a frequency. Sleep approaches on the same road you used to come here. It knows the landmarks. The shy garden between parapets. The elders placing stones into small spaces without needing to win. The pavilion ceiling that did not pretend to be the sky and was better for the honesty. The terrace step that held without announcement. The beach where a bowl tipped its contents into water and made a gesture that meant thank you without syllables. The map that let a finger rest where the blue seemed endless and then asked nothing more of the finger than rest. If a thought returns, it will be simple enough to carry without stirring the sheets. Nothing vanishes. Everything rearranges. The great motherland was never needed to explain your hunger for kinship. The hunger explains itself by living quietly in your palms when they turn upward. The sea does not lecture. It attends. It will attend while you sleep, the way it attends to shores that slip and grow, to islands that are hosts, and to currents that are messengers, to winds that argue politely and then agree to return tomorrow. Attendance is a kind of love. Lay down now the last of your requirements. The night has nothing to prove. If you visited the ocean now, it would be doing precisely what it was doing before you were born and what it will be doing after your worries have learned better uses for themselves. It will be lifting and setting, writing and erasing, delivering and retrieving. The story you walked through, rooms imagined and rooms measured, was not meant to end in conquest. It was meant to end here, at the shore of sleep, where questions that wanted to be kings become neighbors, and where certainty is content to sit without crossing its legs. Shh. Breathe. The ocean remembers. It remembers the soft industry of your attention, and the way you drew your shoulders down as if accepting a cloak. It remembers your ear, learning to recognize the difference between spectacle and fidelity, and choosing fidelity because it was kinder to the nervous system. It remembers the first time you felt the plainness of a seafloor as a blessing rather than a deprivation. It remembers that you understood, or nearly did, that being held is better than being dazzled, and that the world is better at holding than dazzling when allowed to work at its preferred scale. What remains, then, is not a continent but a habit, not a capital but a rhythm, not a staircase but a step you take with care. The habit is attention turned gentle. The rhythm is breath that partners, without ceremony, with water. The step is neither onto nor away from an abyss. It is onto a floor that has agreed to be there while you need it. Tomorrow there may be numbers to read, maps to fold, pages to turn, elders to greet, cups to wash, shadows to watch move. None of that is an argument for or against a legend. All of it is a way of living inside a world that does not abandon you when you stop insisting it be simpler. Close your eyes. Let the seam down the world's back stitch itself into your spine, one quiet vertebra at a time. Let the plane extend without end until it becomes the exact size of your breath. Let the fold at the edge of the floor bow and hold, as if saying grace. Let the hosts keep their posts. Let the currents carry their letters with a diligence that requires nothing from you but sleep. You have arrived not at an answer, but at a cadence. A cadence is the best ending because it never ends. It only continues at a volume you can bear. Shh. Breathe. The ocean remembers.